Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome for a second time a well-respected author from the US, Mr. Rishad Tobaccowala. Rishad, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Thank you for inviting me the second time.
Thank you. Rishad is an author. Last time we spoke about his first book, Restoring the Soul of Business, Staying Human in the Age of Data. Today we are going to speak about his new book or his latest work, which is Rethinking Work. Rishad is also the former Chief Strategy and Growth Officer of the Publicis Group. He's chairman of the Tobaccowala Foundation, and he's been recognized by Business Week and Time Magazine. So, Rishad, given that we've already had a conversation about your own journey, let's go straight to your new book, Rethinking Work. And before I ask you any question, I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to go and check out Mr. Rishad Tobaccowala's book, Rethinking Work. So, my first question, how do you define the term great rethinking and why is it essential now?
The reason it is essential is it is my belief that work will change more between 2020 and 2030
Mhm.
than it has in the previous 5 decades.
Right.
And it will change because of five forces that are intertwined, but I tease them out separately.
Mhm.
One of them is the impact of demographic change.
Mhm.
So, in most countries, India is an exception right now, but in most countries, populations are declining and they're aging.
Right.
You also have multiple generations at work, which is true
Mhm.
in India
Mhm.
and other parts of the world. You also have what I basically call the rise of the individual, where the individual has got more tools and is less likely to say, well, whatever the boss says or whatever the
Mhm.
company says.
Mhm.
So those are these sort of what I call sociographical societal changes.
Mhm.
Then you've got technology, of which obviously AI is a big one, but there are lots of other technologies.
Right.
You have the rise of marketplaces, and those are everything from an Amazon to a Flipkart to a Etsy to a Shopify
Mhm.
that allows people to both make their resources and services available to the world
Mhm.
and also access resources and services from everywhere in the world to build businesses.
Mhm.
The fourth is the rise of the side hustle, the side gig.
Mhm.
So, two-thirds of young people anywhere in the world want to now work for themselves, ideally,
Correct. Yeah.
versus a company.
Mhm.
And finally, we have the impact of COVID, which showed the world that the way we were working in 2019 was very ancient.
Mhm.
Uh, all of us going into offices, going up to buildings, sitting there. Not that that isn't important, but there
Mhm.
are lots of other ways. So you
Mhm.
take those five, put them all together, and you see some very significant changes happening. In
Amazing.
the US, for instance, more people will this year or next year have freelance work as many as people will have full-time work,
Wow. Wow.
right? And I expect by the end of this decade, 2 out of 3 people will primarily work different gigs to make their income,
Hmm.
and only 1 out of 3 people will have full-time jobs.
Incredible.
That's pretty radical and that's pretty significant. So that's the reason why I believe there is the great rethinking, and most companies and most leaders and most individuals unfortunately are focused on something that is not actually a big deal at all, which is where
Hmm.
you work.
Hmm.
Should you be in the office? Should you not be in the office? It doesn't matter whether you're in the office 5 days or you're not in the office. That doesn't solve for the future of work.
Hmm.
That's just a small side thing. So
Hmm.
people aren't willing to actually reimagine work, and that's what's about to happen.
Hmm. What a great response. Thank you. But
Yes.
Rishad, you also talk about the fractionalized employee, which I'm assuming is the gig worker. Tell me, how will this trend redefine job roles? And
Yep.
given the fact that you and I have all spent a lot of time in the big corporate world, where do these big corporations get talent from if such a large number of people will
So
be
the
doing
way
gig
the
work?
way to think, yeah. So the way to think about it is this: gig work is a little different than the fractionalized employee.
Hmm.
But so what happens is today the gig work is like being a freelancer,
Correct.
right? We have freelancers.
Yeah.
We have contract employees. So that's what, in fact, a lot of Indian companies do. They
Mm.
sell people to Western companies.
Hmm.
So, Google will hire many, many people from a
Yeah.
Wipro or an Infosys. That's a contract employee. So
Correct.
you've contract, you're freelance, and you're full-time. What I am suggesting is the rise of a new type of employee, which is a fractionalized employee.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference is, unlike a freelance employee, this person ends up working 60, 80% of their time for one company.
Mm-hmm.
They basically get 60, 80% of their, you know, pay, bonus, etc. They get
Yeah.
100% of healthcare,
Yeah.
right? But they only work 3 or 4 or sometimes, half the time.
Hmm.
Now, it's important. The three reasons why it's important and also answers the question of where do people get their talent.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe companies are going to want to access the best talent they possibly can.
Hmm.
And they're going to figure out, how do I combine full-time employees, these new kinds of fractionalized employees,
Mm-hmm.
contract employees, and freelance employees?
Right.
And how do I plug and play them? Now, why
Hmm.
is this important? In countries where there's aging populations and
Hmm.
people are struggling to look after their kids and looking after the stuff, a lot of people don't want to work 5 days
Hmm.
a week.
Hmm.
They want to work 3 or 4 days. If
Hmm.
you're aging, you might want to say, I don't want to go to retirement, but I want to work a little bit less.
Hmm.
So this is the way you can actually access talent from all over the place. That's
Hmm.
one of the key things.
Right.
But the second is, let's think about what AI is going to do. And no one is actually speaking it aloud. So let me tell you this.
Mm-hmm.
AI is going to significantly reduce the need for employees in a company,
Right.
period,
Hmm.
over and out. No
Right.
one is telling you that. You better
Hmm.
be aware of it.
Hmm.
Okay. You see what's happening today at Meta. Meta's revenue keeps going up and they keep laying off 5%, 10%, 5%. They're not adding,
Hmm.
right? And so AI basically makes things more efficient and effective. And it actually says, I may not need 20% of my employees.
Hmm.
Now, at some particular stage, laying off 20% of your employees is brutal.
Hmm.
And then also, you may actually want all 100% of the skills, but you don't want them all the time.
Right.
So you let people basically say, you're going to work 3 to 4 days. You'll keep your job 3 to 4 days, and then you do things on the outside.
Hmm.
So in effect, these new ways are the only way that
Hmm.
companies can actually compete
Hmm.
and access talent. Full-time employees, what you and I grew up with, is yesterday's news. It's
Correct.
absolutely yesterday's news.
Very well said. But Rishad, you also compare traditional organizations to classical music and
Yes.
future organizations to jazz.
Yes.
Help me understand this metaphor and give me an
Sure.
example.
So the example is very simple. So very quickly, classical music is a hierarchy-bound place where
Hmm.
everybody listens to a conductor, which
Hmm.
in this case would be a boss,
Yeah.
right? Everybody has a particular role.
Hmm.
You play the violin, I play, um, the not
Yeah.
saxophone. I
Yeah.
play, let's say, the viola. Somebody else plays the flute.
Hmm.
Okay, and then we play exactly our instrument when we are told to play our instrument.
Hmm.
So it's very regimented, but that's the way it is.
Hmm.
The new world of work is going to be much more improvisational. So
Hmm.
jazz music is improvised,
Correct.
which is we play our instruments, but we come in and out based on what other people are doing. We
Hmm.
play, we don't play, right? And we actually play off each other, or maybe someone is taking a lead at a moment, like a
Hmm.
task leader,
Hmm.
right? Or a project leader, but there is no big boss.
Hmm.
So in one case, we are under control. The other case, we're under influence.
Hmm.
Okay, zone of control versus zone of influence.
Yeah.
And in a world where you've got very fast speeds, you're going from project to project. When you've got employees of all different types, the classical model doesn't work.
Hmm.
However, the good news for classically trained people is the best jazz players were classically trained.
Correct.
Okay. So it doesn't mean you can't be a great jazz player. It
Hmm.
just means as a leader,
Hmm.
you have to go from what I call a zone of control mindset,
Hmm.
where you're allocating, delegating, monitoring, and measuring,
Hmm.
to a zone of influence mindset,
Hmm.
where you are basically inspiring, creating, building, and mentoring.
Hmm. You also speak about the decline of the traditional manager.
Yes,
And you just mentioned, the roles that you and I have been in may no
yes,
longer exist. What
yes,
roles do you see replacing
sure.
these positions?
So the traditional manager, who I call a boss,
Hmm.
is going to be replaced by a leader.
Hmm.
So what do I mean? What's the difference? A lot of people, we've entered this age of debossification where people don't want bosses. They
Hmm.
want somebody who will lead them.
Hmm.
And leading is, as I said, inspiring, making, creating, building, mentoring.
Hmm.
Boss is much more about checking in, managing, monitoring. People
Hmm.
don't want that as much.
Yeah.
So a boss also tends to be built around experience,
Hmm.
and a leader tends to be built around expertise.
Hmm.
So what we're looking for is leaders versus bosses,
Hmm.
right? Now, obviously, all leaders have to have some boss-like tendencies. You
Correct.
got to monitor, you got to measure. But bosses now have to grow up to be like leaders.
Hmm.
And the other part of it is you may not actually in a company or in a job have one boss anymore or one leader.
Hmm.
You might have you might go from job or from assignment to assignment to assignment, very much like a consulting company or in the movie business.
Yes.
And in each case, you will have a different task or project leader.
Yeah.
But if you're working in a company, what they'll basically do is they'll give you two types of people.
Hmm.
So one is you'll be going from project leader to project leader based on the project you're working on,
Hmm.
but they will also align you with a longer term mentor.
Hmm.
So you feel connected to somebody as you go
Hmm.
from project to project. So
Hmm.
somebody is responsible for your career,
Hmm.
and other people are responsible for that particular project.
Hmm. Very interesting. But on the other side, in a world that is moving towards remote and hybrid work, uh, and most of us have grown up on the assumption that you have colleagues, you go for lunch together, you have coffee
Yep.
together, work, conversations at the photocopying machine, etc., etc. How can companies build stronger teams?
So it's very, very important. So I believe that in most cases, in-person interaction is very important for the
Hmm.
reasons you've just basically said.
Correct.
In-person interaction helps you learn, build relationships.
Hmm.
It helps you come up with creative ideas, etc. All of those are very, very important, which is called
Hmm.
in-person interaction.
Correct.
So what most companies have made the mistake of is thinking that in-person interaction and the office are the same thing,
Hmm.
and they're not.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
So if you think about it, I worked in the advertising and marketing business.
Yeah.
When we wanted to do creative brainstorming, we used to leave the office to go to offsites.
Hmm.
When I wanted to basically build a relationship, I'd go to a coffee shop, a bar, or a restaurant.
Hmm.
When I wanted to learn, I'd go to events,
Hmm.
right? Like CES, scans, Comdex. And most of us carry our own water, and there isn't really even a water cooler to
Right.
walk to,
Hmm.
right? So what I ask companies to do
Hmm.
is yes, in-person interaction is really important, but three things really. One is how much of it do you need?
Hmm.
Second is do you need the same amount depending on every job and every level?
Right.
And third is how best do you make it possible?
Hmm.
So what I basically believe is if you're younger in the organization,
Hmm.
you might need much more in-person interaction
Hmm.
than if you're in the middle management.
Right.
If you are doing something which is sales, you need more in-person interaction than if you're writing software code,
Hmm.
right? So the whole idea is it's not one size fits model, right? Everybody needs some in-person interaction,
Hmm.
but it depends on the level and the job. So
Hmm.
with that being said, why don't we rethink and how much do you need? I would basically say if you interact with your teams maybe 3 to 4 days a month, but
Hmm.
all day long, that's more than enough. And from the other time, you all can meet in other places. You all can say, hey, let's get together in a restaurant, let's get anywhere else. So
Correct.
the company needs to organize the physical space
Hmm.
to be built around in-person interaction, which means they have to program the office.
Hmm.
But if people come into the office to do exactly what they're doing at home, and
Hmm.
in order to have silence, they put on headphones, right? What you're basically doing is you're creating great deals of resentment. People are
Hmm.
traveling a long distance to come and do the same thing they're doing at home,
Right.
which is expensive. But
Hmm.
as importantly, and this is the most important thing, is to a great extent, they are not even now with the technology or an environment to work as they used
Hmm.
to have at home. Because in most places, the technology in the home is better than the technology in the office,
Correct.
right? But at the very same stage for different
Hmm.
markets, like in
Hmm.
India and in
Hmm.
China, there's
Hmm.
not enough space at home,
Correct.
right? So you have to come to some other place. So it's like, as I said, there isn't a one size fits model, but
Hmm.
it's very lazy thinking that says, yes, in person interaction is important. Therefore,
Hmm.
everybody has to be in the office 3, 4 days a week,
Hmm.
right? Which is, why does it have to be in the office? And why does it have to be everybody 3 to 4 days of the week?
Absolutely. Very well said. Well said. But a few minutes back, were talking about the um, impact of AI and how Meta
Yep.
is beginning to change. What are your thoughts on balancing human and machine collaboration? And how will this change work?
Right. So one of the chapters in my book, an entire chapter is called Machine-Human
Mm,
Coexistence. Okay. So I basically believe three things. One is AI is, even today, with everything you hear about it, significantly underhyped.
mm,
Okay. And so what I'd like to explain to people is think about AI the following three ways
mm,
for everybody. Number one, AI is like electricity.
mm.
Everybody's going to have it. Itself is not going to be a differentiator, but
Correct.
if you decide not to use electricity, you will lose.
Mm,
Okay, if you decide to work with candlelight when everybody else is using electricity, you will
yeah.
lose,
Mm,
right?
mm,
That's number one. Number two, when electricity came around, it changed the way people worked. It created brand new organizations.
correct.
So, in addition to AI making things more efficient and effective, it
Mm,
might even change business models.
mm,
So, I ask people to ask, is AI going to be like what electric and software was to the automobile industry,
mm,
which is the entire industry got redefined, and all the established players
mm,
basically are having trouble compared to an Uber and a Tesla,
mm.
right? So, to a great extent, the second thing is, so first is think about AI is like electricity. If you don't use it, you have lost.
Yeah.
Second is like electricity, it may not only just make your job more effective and efficient, but you may have to rethink your entire company and what you do and how you do it.
Mm,
The third is think about AI as a not as a machine and not as a human, but as an
mm.
alien life form that you are collaborating with.
Right.
Okay. And they are this alien life form, so alien intelligence or augmented intelligence, and you are
Mm,
human intelligence.
mm,
And I believe what basically happens is you embrace what AI can do, and then you adapt your job, and then
mm,
you complement AI.
mm,
And complementing AI is with HI.
mm,
And HI is not just human intelligence,
mm,
but it's human intuition, human imagination, and
mm,
human insight.
mm.
Because this alien does not have emotion,
Well
and
said.
we do.
Well said. Well said. You also speak about the shift from financial motivation to meaning and community.
Yes.
How will leaders and organizations adjust to this shift?
So here is a key. This shift is also generational,
Mm,
right? And what is basically happening is financial motivation is always going to be important. So if
mm,
somebody basically says financial motivation is not important, it is still till you come to a stage where it's less important versus not
mm,
important, right?
mm,
It continues to be the number one reason people work is for income.
mm,
But when you are basically starting to do well, as I tell people, you join a company because of money, fame, and power.
mm,
Okay. But you stay in a company because of purpose, meaning, and connections.
mm,
You feel connected to the cause, you feel connected to your colleagues, your clients, right? You believe in the purpose of the company and meeting.
mm,
So
mm,
that's why you stay. And then you thrive because of freedom, story, and growth. You're
mm,
treated like an adult, you're given freedom.
mm,
You can tell your story and not just the company's story.
mm,
And not only does the company grow, but you grow your skills, your income, you
mm,
as a person,
mm,
right? So what I'm explaining to companies is eventually people don't make decisions on staying or leaving on a company just on financials. Because
mm,
if you are feeling well, quite well compensated in a company, but you like your boss, you like what you're doing, you're
mm,
growing,
mm,
right? Going to a company for a 20% higher salary when you
mm.
don't know your boss, you don't like the company, you have to re-establish relationships is very
Right.
difficult. So
Right.
that's the key thing, which is we fixate on one number versus thinking about many things. So again,
Correct.
finance is important, but purpose, meaning, growth, story
Mm.
are also very important.
Fascinating. So I have time for three more questions for you.
Sure.
My next question is you talk about emotional rewiring due to the pandemic.
Yes.
How can leaders address and adapt to these changes?
So the biggest thing that happened in the pandemic, and it's one of the things I mentioned in my book,
Yeah.
is that we think that the biggest impact of the pandemic was on where we work.
Mm,
And there was clearly an implication of that.
mm,
But I believe the biggest one was far more emotional than physical space,
right.
which is why we work and what are we doing with our lives.
Right.
Because if you remember when you're home for 2 years and
Mm,
there are people dying all around you,
mm,
you begin to ask questions,
mm,
right?
mm,
Why am I doing this?
mm,
Who is my boss?
Hmm.
How am I spending my time?
Correct.
Do I even like my family? Right?
Correct.
Because I had to spend all my time with them. So
Hmm.
to a great extent, when people came out of it, they basically came out of it. Again, this is general. Different people
Hmm.
came out differently. But generally, what people came out was they basically said, I've been spending my entire working career
Hmm.
thinking about how I can do work-life balance.
Hmm.
Maybe that's the wrong question.
Hmm.
Maybe I should be thinking about work-life integration.
Hmm.
And instead of thinking about how to fit life into my work,
Hmm.
I should think about how to fit work into my life.
Well said. Well said. Great response. Two more questions.
Yeah.
What role, if any, do you see of the governments to facilitate this new era of work? Because in most countries, the government is also the biggest employer.
Yes. So I believe governments are very, very important.
Correct.
Right now I speak to you in the United States, where
Hmm.
there is a massive this Doge effort, which obviously the government here has to be slimmed down,
Hmm.
but the underlying thing is it's not just about reduction of people, it's about demeaning of people, which is wrong,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
What you have to do is if you have to basically have fewer people because you can't afford to have more people, you don't demean them and demean everybody.
Yep.
And in the US, there's this anti-government mode. And my stuff is next time we're in trouble, we'll yell and scream for the government and they better be there. So
Hmm.
I believe government has a role,
Yep.
right, in everything.
Hmm.
So there are two things that I believe government, one is obviously they're a very big employer, but the other thing that government does is it provides and subsidizes both transitions and healthcare.
Hmm.
And what I basically believe is in most companies, in the United States, for instance, most people's healthcare is associated with their work. And if they don't have a full-time job, they don't have healthcare, which is why I've come up with fractionalized employee.
Hmm.
So if you have healthcare, it gives you a little bit more benefits.
Hmm.
But the other is, as we're moving from this age to another age, we're going to have to require, some people are going to be out of jobs, so we need some sort of social net.
Correct.
But as importantly, we need retraining and
Hmm.
education,
Hmm.
right? And so government funds that help provide a social net, provide healthcare and transition,
Hmm.
and subsidize and pay companies for training and retraining of people are going to be
Hmm.
very important.
Hmm.
Because the truth of the matter is, we're not going to go from this world to the next world without unfortunate transition and pain,
Correct.
right? It's not going to be, as people said, if you're a truck driver and self-driving trucks replace your job, you can go
Hmm.
write code. You
Hmm.
can't, because you have
Yeah.
to learn how to write code.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said. And my last question for you, Rishad. If there's one key takeaway from rethinking work that you hope readers will implement, what would it be?
I think the single biggest thing that I would ask everybody to think about is, regardless of the company you work for, and I worked for 37 years for a 100,000 person company,
Hmm.
right? And I was very senior and
Yeah.
I did well, and I continue to engage with them 6 years later after stopping a full-time career. So everything, it was beautiful and
Hmm.
continues to be beautiful.
Hmm.
But the reason I was successful is I did something early on, which is what I think everybody needs to do,
Hmm.
which is think of yourself as a company of one.
Hmm.
You're your own HR,
Well said.
right? And as a company of one, you need to do three things:
Yeah.
build expertise,
Hmm.
build a reputation,
Hmm.
and be very collaborative with other people.
Hmm.
Because then, even if you're working, because in the future, your company will be connecting you to tasks.
Hmm.
And if you're known for skills, you're known for collaboration,
Hmm.
and you have a reputation, whether you are inside a 100,000 person company or as a one person company, you'll do better. So
Hmm.
my whole stuff, and the reason this book is very popular, and by the way, because I grew up in India, it was simultaneously launched US and India,
Okay.
right?
Hmm.
India didn't come 6 months later, 9 months later. So
Hmm.
it's on Flipkart, it's on Amazon India, it's on Crossword, it's wherever you want,
Yeah.
right? And it's only 400 rupees. So buy it because it's an operating manual
Well said.
for your future.
Hmm. Amazing. And I'm going to ask all our viewers again to take up Rishad's
Sure.
advice. Look for the book on Amazon and Flipkart and all the other
Flipkart
bookstores.
and its stores, yeah.
Absolutely. But on that note, Rishad, and your incredible piece of advice, think of yourself as a company of one, build expertise, build reputation, which is also build your personal brand, and build collaborations. Thank you so much,
Yes.
Rishad, for speaking to me about rethinking work. We thought we covered some very interesting ground today. We talked about great rethinking. You talked to us about the five forces reshaping work. You spoke about the fractionalized employee. You spoke about traditional managers, remote hybrid work, how will this will impact. We also spoke about AI, and we finally spoke about the role of government. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you, Ashutosh, for inviting me again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.